The hammer fell against the hot metal with a dull ring that echoed through the small workshop. Deho wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked at the bent piece of iron he was trying to turn into a farming tool. The metal was stubborn today, just like every other day for the past 20 years. His forge sat at the edge of New Hanyang Colony, a small settlement on a planet so far from Earth that most people had forgotten its name. The workshop was simple: 4 walls, a roof that leaked when it rained, and a forge that burned wood because energy cells were too expensive. Deho had built it himself when he first arrived. Young and full of dreams about becoming a master craftsman, those dreams had died somewhere between his 1,000th horseshoe and his 10,000th repair job. Now at 43 years old, Deho was just tired. His back ached from bending over the anvil. His arms were strong, but his spirit was weak. Every morning he lit the forge fires, and every evening he put them out, creating the same simple tools and fixing the same broken equipment that the farmers brought him. The settlers of New Hanyang were good people, but they had no money for fancy work. They needed plows that could break the hard soil and axes that could cut the thick trees. They needed horseshoes for their animals and nails for their buildings. They did not need art or beauty or anything that required real skill. Deho had learned to accept this life. He made enough money to buy food and keep his small house warm. He had no family, no wife, no children to worry about. His days were quiet and predictable. He told himself this was enough. The piece of metal he was working on would become a hoe for Farmer Kim. It was the 3rd hoe he had made this month because Farmer Kim kept breaking them on rocks. The work was boring but familiar. Heat the metal, hammer it flat, bend it to shape, attach a handle. He could do it with his eyes closed. As the sun began to set, Deho started to clean up his workspace. He put away his tools in the same order he had used for 20 years. He banked the forge fires so they would be ready to light again tomorrow morning. He swept the metal shavings into a bucket that he would empty behind the workshop. It was then that he noticed the shadow in his doorway. Deho looked up, expecting to see one of the farmers with another broken tool or a last-minute request. Instead, he saw something that made him drop his broom. The being standing in his doorway was tall, much taller than any human. She had the shape of a woman, but her skin was covered in scales that changed color in the light of his forge. Her eyes were large and golden like coins made of fire. When she moved, the scales shifted from silver to gold to colors he had no names for. She was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, like staring into the sun or trying to hold fire in his bare hands. "I seek the metal worker," she said, and her voice was like music played on instruments he had never heard. Deho stood frozen, his mouth open. In 30 years of blacksmithing, he had never seen anything like her. The scales on her arms caught the dying light of his forge and threw it back in patterns that moved like living things. She was clearly not human, but she spoke his language perfectly. "I am the blacksmith here," he managed to say, his voice rough from surprise. "What do you need?" She stepped into his workshop, moving with a grace that made every step look like dancing. She was so tall that she had to duck slightly to avoid hitting her head on the low roof beams. When she moved, Deho could hear a soft sound like wind chimes made of metal. "My name is Yuna," she said, looking around his simple workshop with eyes that seemed to see everything. "I represent people from far away. We have need of your services." Deho had never heard of anyone needing his services except for the local farmers. "What kind of work do you want?" Yuna picked up one of his practice swords from the workbench. It was nothing special, just a piece of steel he had been using to practice his technique. She tested its weight and balance like someone who knew weapons well. "Tell me, metalworker," she said, "have you ever wondered why weapons made by human hands are valued across the stars?" Deho had heard stories from the traders who sometimes passed through New Hanyang. Stories about collectors and far-off systems who paid crazy prices for human-made tools and weapons. He had always thought they were just stories, tales told to make small-town blacksmiths feel important. "I have heard rumors," he said carefully. "They are not rumors." Yuna set down the sword and turned to face him fully. "There is something special about human metalworking, something your people do not understand about themselves. The metal you shape with your hands and your fires has properties that can change the course of wars." The words washed over Deho like water from a broken dam. Wars and special properties and far-off stars belonged in books and entertainment shows, not in conversations with strange visitors in his workshop. "I think you have the wrong person," he said. "I just fix farming tools and make horseshoes. I am not special." Yuna's golden eyes studied him for a long moment. The greatest wars in the galaxy are not fought with energy weapons or planet-killing ships. They are fought with steel and iron, with metal that can cut through force fields and armor that can turn aside particle beams. Your human steel forged by human hands can do things that no other metal in the galaxy can do. That sounds like magic, Deho said. It is not magic. It is something deeper than magic. It is something in the way humans understand metal, in the way you work with fire and hammer and anvil. Every piece you create carries a part of your will, your intention, your life force. That is what makes it special. Yuna moved to his forge and placed her scaled hand near the dying embers. There are those in the galaxy who would kill for weapons like the ones you can make. There are others who would die to stop them from getting such weapons. And which are you? Deho asked. She smiled, and for the first time since she had appeared, she looked almost human. I am someone who hopes that a tired blacksmith on a forgotten world might be willing to help save the galaxy. Deho looked around his simple workshop, at the tools that had been his companions for 30 years, at the forge that had been his whole world. He thought about his quiet life and his small dreams and his acceptance of being ordinary. Then he looked at Yuna, at the hope in her golden eyes and the way the forge light played across her scales, and he felt something he had not felt in years. He felt like maybe, just maybe, his life was about to become something more than he had ever imagined possible. Deho did not sleep that night. He sat on his bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about golden eyes and scales that changed color and words that spoke of wars among the stars. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Yuna standing in his workshop, telling him that his simple blacksmith skills could save the galaxy. By morning, he had almost convinced himself it was all a dream. Too much cheap wine with dinner and too many hours breathing forge smoke could make a man see things that were not there. He had heard of other people on New Hanyang who claimed to see strange visitors in the night. The colony doctor said it was stress and loneliness playing tricks on tired minds. But when Deho walked into his workshop to start the morning fires, Yuna was already there waiting for him. She stood beside his workbench, looking at his tools with the careful attention of someone who understood good craftsmanship. In the morning light, her scales were more silver than gold, and she seemed even taller than she had the night before. You came back, Deho said, not sure if he was happy or terrified. I told you we had need of your services, Yuna replied. Did you think about what I said? Deho had thought about little else. You said human metal could change wars. You said my steel was special, but I have been making the same horseshoes and farm tools for 20 years. There is nothing special about any of it. Yuna reached into a bag she carried and pulled out something that made Deho take a step backward. It looked like a metal spider, but wrong in every way possible. Its legs moved even though it was perfectly still. Its surface seemed to shift and flow like liquid, but when he looked directly at it, it appeared solid. This is a combat drone used by our enemies, Yuna said, setting the device on his workbench. They call themselves the Hegemony. They have conquered 43 star systems and enslaved billions of people. Their soldiers carry thousands of these devices. Deho leaned closer, fascinated despite his fear. The thing hurt to look at, as if his eyes could not quite focus on it properly. What does it do? It can pass through most materials and explode inside its target. Walls, armor, even energy shields cannot stop it. Yuna touched something on the device and it began to glow with an inner light that made Deho's skin crawl. Most materials. She gestured toward the practice sword he had been working on yesterday. It was nothing special. Just a piece of steel he used to practice his sword-making techniques. He had forged it 3 months ago when he was bored and wanted to try something different from farming tools. Pick up your sword, Yuna said. Deho hesitated. The glowing device looked dangerous and he did not want to get close to it. But something in Yuna's voice made him trust her. He picked up the sword, feeling its familiar weight in his hands. Now strike the device, she commanded. What if it explodes? It will not explode. Not when hit by that blade. Deho raised the sword, still not sure he believed what was happening. The device continued to glow and shift, looking more alien and dangerous with each passing second. He brought the blade down in a simple overhead cut, the kind of strike he had practiced 10,000 times on pieces of wood and metal. The sword hit the device with a sharp ring of metal on metal. To Deho's amazement, the alien technology sparked and went dark immediately. The flowing lines on its surface became jagged and broken. The inner light died like a candle being blown out. Impossible, he whispered. Yuna picked up the broken device and showed it to him. Where his sword had touched it, the metal was not just cut but somehow changed. The alien material had become ordinary steel, dull and lifeless. Your blade did not just break this device, she explained. It changed the very nature of the metal. The quantum structures that allow it to phase through matter have been completely disrupted. I do not understand those words, Deho said. You do not need to understand the words. You only need to understand that what you just did should be impossible. No weapon in the galaxy can damage those devices except steel forged by human hands. Deho set the sword down with new respect. It looked exactly the same as it had before, but now he could feel something different about it. A humming in the metal as if it were alive and aware. How is this possible? He asked. We do not know, Yuna admitted. Our best scientists have studied human metallurgy for years. There is something in the way your people work with metal that creates weapons existing partially outside normal space and time. Every hammer blow, every moment in the forge fire, every drop of sweat that falls on the anvil becomes part of the final product. She moved to his forge and began to light it, her scaled hands working with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. The metal remembers the passion of its creator. It holds the intention and will of the smith who shaped it. That is what makes it deadly to our enemies. Our enemies? Deho noticed her choice of words. The hegemony advanced scouts will arrive at the edge of human space in 6 months, Yuna said, watching the flames grow higher. The main invasion fleet will follow within a year. Your governments know nothing about this. Your military forces are not prepared for what is coming. The workshop suddenly felt very cold despite the growing fire. An invasion? Of Earth? Of all human worlds. The hegemony does not negotiate or offer terms. They arrive, they conquer, they enslave or kill everyone they find. They have done this to 43 civilizations. Humans will be the 44th unless we stop them. We? Yuna turned to face him, her golden eyes reflecting the forge fire. My people have been fighting the hegemony for 800 years. We have never won a major victory. We have only survived by hiding and running and watching other species die. But now we have found something the hegemony cannot defend against. She gestured toward his sword, human steel. Weapons that can cut through their energy shields. Armor that can turn aside their particle beams. Tools that can disable their technology with a single touch. Deho looked around his simple workshop, trying to imagine it as the center of some galactic war. What do you want from me? Everything, Yuna said simply. We want you to forge weapons unlike anything you have ever created. Blades that can cut through energy itself. Armor that can redirect force into other dimensions. Tools that can reshape reality. I am just one man with a small forge. You are human, she replied. That makes you the most dangerous metalworker in the galaxy. And you will not be alone. We have been searching for human smiths across dozens of worlds. Some have already agreed to help us. She pulled out what looked like technical drawings and spread them across his workbench. The designs showed weapons and armor that seemed to belong in fantasy stories rather than real life. Swords with blades that curved through impossible angles. Shields that appeared to be made of solid light. Hammers that seemed to exist in several places at once. These are the weapons we need, Yuna explained. Each one designed to exploit the unique properties of human-forged steel. With these, we might have a chance to stop the hegemony before they reach Earth. Deho studied the strange designs, his craftsman's eye picking out details even as his mind struggled to understand what he was looking at. Some of the techniques shown in the drawings were familiar. Others looked like they would require magic to accomplish. How long do we have? He asked. To prepare? 6 months before the first scouts arrive. To forge enough weapons to armor resistance? Perhaps a year if we are fortunate. Deho thought about his quiet life, his simple routine, his acceptance of being ordinary. Then he looked at the broken alien device on his workbench and the hope in Yuna's ancient eyes. When do we start? He said. For the first time since he had met her, Yuna smiled with genuine joy. We start now. The changes to Deho's workshop began 3 days after Yuna showed him the broken alien device. He woke up that morning to find large containers sitting outside his door, each one marked with symbols he could not read. When Yuna arrived an hour later, she smiled at his confused expression. Materials, she said simply. You cannot forge weapons to fight the hegemony with ordinary iron and steel. The first container held metal that felt warm to the touch, even though it had been sitting in the cold morning air. When Deho held a piece up to the light, it seemed to glow from within. The second container was filled with what looked like crystals, but they sang softly when the wind touched them. "What is all this?" he asked. "Quantum steel from the mining worlds of Kepler-7," Yuna explained, lifting a bar of the warm metal. "Crystal matrices from the singing caves of Tau Ceti. Alloys that exist in several dimensions at once. Materials that most smiths in the galaxy have never even heard of." Over the next week, more containers arrived. Some came on cargo ships that landed behind his workshop under cover of darkness. Others simply appeared overnight as if transported by magic. Each delivery brought stranger and more wonderful materials. There was metal that changed color depending on who touched it. There were crystals that could store energy from starlight. There were alloys that felt solid but looked transparent. Some of the materials seemed to move on their own when no one was watching them. "How are you getting all of this?" Deho asked as they unpacked a container full of tools he had never seen before. "The Resistance has been preparing for this moment for many years," Yuna replied. "We have allies across 40 star systems. Some are traders who owe us favors. Others are scientists who believe in our cause. A few are thieves who steal from hegemony supply lines." The transformation of his workshop took 3 weeks. Workers arrived from somewhere to help install equipment that looked more like art than machinery. His old forge was replaced with something that burned with flames of every color. The new anvil was carved from a single piece of metal so hard it could not be scratched by the strongest tools. "This feels like too much," Deho said, watching technicians install devices around his workspace that hummed with invisible energy. "I am just a simple blacksmith." "You were a simple blacksmith," Yuna corrected. "Now you are something the galaxy has never seen before. A human weaponsmith with access to materials and techniques from 100 different worlds." The first project she gave him was a knife, simple in shape but complex in every other way. The blade was to be forged from quantum steel mixed with crystal dust. The handle would contain technology that could adjust the knife's properties while it was being used. Deho studied the technical drawings until his eyes hurt. Half the words meant nothing to him. The other half described processes that seemed impossible. "I do not understand how to make the blade exist in folded space," he said. "You do not need to understand it," Yuna replied. "Your hands will know what to do. Trust your instincts. Trust the metal." He heated the quantum steel in his new forge, watching it glow with colors that had no names. As he worked, he felt the familiar rhythm of creation flow through him. Hammer met anvil in patterns older than civilization, but the metal responded in ways he had never experienced. The steel seemed to sing as he shaped it. The crystal dust created patterns that moved like living things. When he folded the metal, it bent in directions that should not have existed. When he quenched the blade, the steam that rose carried lights that danced in the air. The finished knife looked ordinary enough, but Deho could feel power humming within its structure. When he held it, the blade seemed to vibrate in harmony with his heartbeat. "Test it," Yuna said, producing another hegemony device from her collection. The knife slid through the alien technology like it was made of soft butter. More than that, the cut seemed to disrupt the very air around the device. The alien metal collapsed into dust that sparkled and disappeared. "By all the stars," Yuna breathed. "It is even more effective than our scientists predicted." Word began to spread through channels Deho did not know existed. People started arriving at his workshop from other worlds. A quiet farmer named Kyung-min turned out to be a leader in the resistance movement. A woman calling herself Heejin was actually a master strategist who had been planning the fight against the hegemony for years. His simple workshop became the center of something much larger than he had ever imagined. Representatives from dozens of species came to watch him work. Scientists took measurements and made notes. Military leaders discussed tactics and strategies. "How many more smiths like me are there?" Deho asked Yuna one evening as they cleaned up after another day of impossible metallurgy. 43 workshops are now operational," she replied. "Each one staffed by human metalworkers we have been quietly recruiting. Some were already skilled smiths. Others were beginners who showed promise. All of them are learning to create weapons the galaxy has never seen before." Deho continued working, but now each project was more ambitious than the last. Swords that could cut through energy barriers. Armor plating that redirected force into pocket dimensions. Tools that could manipulate matter at levels smaller than atoms. Each creation seemed to surprise even Yuna with its effectiveness. The knife that could cut reality. The hammer that could reshape metal by touching it. The shield that existed in 7 dimensions at once. "What are we building?" he asked one day as he put finishing touches on a set of arrows that could travel through folded space. "Hope," Yuna said simply. The workshop had become something beyond his wildest dreams. Where once he had struggled to make simple farming tools, now he created weapons that defied the laws of physics. Where once he had worked alone in quiet desperation, now he was part of a galactic network of craftsmen united in a common cause. But as the weeks passed and the weapons grew more powerful, Daeho began to understand the true scope of what they were facing. The hegemony was not just another military force. They were a civilization built on conquest and slavery, with technology so advanced it seemed like magic. "Will it be enough?" he asked Yuna as they watched the latest batch of completed weapons being loaded onto transport ships. "It will have to be," she replied, "because if we fail, every free species in the galaxy will share the same fate as the 43 civilizations that came before us." Daeho looked around his transformed workshop, at the impossible tools and magical materials and weapons that could reshape reality itself. 3 months ago he had been a tired blacksmith making horseshoes for farmers. Now he was creating instruments of war that could determine the fate of billions of lives. The quiet life was over. The real work was just beginning. The attack came on a Tuesday night when the 3 moons of New Hanyang were all dark. Daeho was working late in his workshop, putting the final touches on a set of armor plates that could bend light around themselves. The metal sang softly under his hammer, and he was so focused on his work that he almost missed the first explosion. The sound came from the direction of the main settlement, a deep rumble that shook dust from the rafters of his workshop. Daeho looked up from his anvil, hammer still in his hand, wondering if one of the farmers had accidentally blown up their grain storage again. Then the sky caught fire. Streaks of light shot down from the darkness above, each one ending in an explosion that lit up the night. Buildings in the distance began to glow and then disappear, dissolving under weapons that turned solid matter into glowing particles. "They found us," Yuna said, appearing in his doorway like a ghost made of scales and fury. She carried weapons he had forged, a sword in one hand and a shield in the other. "Someone told them where we were." Daeho dropped his hammer and ran to the window. Through the glass he could see ships descending from the sky like metal predators. They moved without sound, their hulls flowing and shifting as if they were alive. Lights played across their surfaces in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Hegemony scouts," Yuna continued, moving efficiently around the workshop to gather the most important weapons. "A full hunting pack. They must have been watching us for weeks." The first explosions in the settlement were followed by screams. Through his window, Daeho could see people running through the streets, some carrying children, others trying to fight back with farming tools and hunting rifles. The human weapons did nothing against the alien ships. "We have to help them," Daeho said, grabbing one of the swords he had made. "We have to save the weapons," Yuna replied firmly. "If the hegemony captures what we have built here, they will study it and find ways to defend against it. Everything we have worked for will be lost." More explosions rocked the workshop. Closer this time. Daeho could hear the sound of metal tearing and stone cracking. Whatever weapons the aliens were using, they could cut through anything the colonists had built. "The people," he said again, "will die anyway if we do not preserve what we have learned here," Yuna said. But her voice was not cold. He could hear the pain in it, the weight of decisions that had no good choices. "This is war, Daeho. In war, sometimes you must choose between saving lives today and saving everyone tomorrow." A section of his workshop wall simply vanished, dissolved by a beam of purple light that left the edges glowing like heated metal. Through the hole stepped creatures that belonged in nightmares. The hegemony soldiers were tall and thin, wearing armor that moved like liquid metal. Their faces were hidden behind masks that reflected everything and showed nothing. When they moved, they made no sound, as if they were not quite solid. The first soldier raised a weapon toward Daeho. Before he could think, before he could be afraid, Yuna was moving. Her sword took the alien through the chest, the human-forged steel cutting through its armor like it was made of paper. The soldier collapsed with a sound like breaking glass. More soldiers appeared through the walls, simply walking through solid matter, as if it did not exist. But Kyungmin and Hyejin had arrived with a team of resistance fighters, all carrying weapons Daeho had created over the past months. The battle was brief, but fierce. The workshop became a chaos of clashing metal and bursts of alien energy. Every time a hegemony weapon fired, something in the room disappeared. Every time a human blade struck alien armor, another enemy fell. Daeho found himself fighting with a sword he had made 2 weeks ago, a blade that could cut through energy shields. He had no training as a warrior, but the weapon seemed to guide his hand. When an alien soldier tried to shoot him, the sword deflected the energy beam back at its source. When the last enemy fell, the workshop was in ruins. Equipment worth more than entire planets lay scattered and broken across the floor. The quantum forge he had used to create impossible metals was cracked beyond repair, its inner fires slowly dying. "It is over," Deho said quietly, looking at the destruction of his life's work. "No," Yuna replied, helping Kyung-min gather what weapons they could carry. "This is just the beginning. The scout attack means the main fleet will arrive sooner than we expected. We have perhaps 2 months instead of 6. Yejin was speaking rapidly into a communication device, coordinating with people Deho could not see. "Evacuation ships are on their way. We can be off-world in 30 minutes. With what?" Deho gestured at the ruins around them. "The forge is destroyed. The materials are scattered. How can we continue the work without a workshop?" Yuna smiled, and for the first time since the attack began, she looked hopeful instead of grim. "Did you think we would put all our resources in one place? There are workshops like this being built on 43 worlds. Each one staffed by human metalworkers we have been recruiting for months." "You planned for this," Deho realized. "We planned for this possibility," Kyung-min corrected, shouldering a pack filled with the most valuable weapons. "The hegemony has spies everywhere. We knew some of our locations would be discovered eventually." "You were never just one blacksmith, Deho," Hyjin added, still talking into her communicator while organizing the evacuation. "You were the test case, the proof that human smiths could create weapons capable of fighting the hegemony. Now that we know it works, we can do it on a scale large enough to matter." As they prepared to leave his ruined workshop, Deho looked back at the place where his new life had begun. The anvil was cracked. The forge was cold. The walls were broken and the roof was gone. But the weapons they had created here were still sharp, still deadly, still capable of cutting through alien technology that should have been invincible. "Where are we going?" he asked as they loaded the salvaged equipment into vehicles that had appeared from nowhere. "Draknari Prime," Yuna replied. "The hidden world where my people have been building something the galaxy has never seen before. A forge complex designed specifically to mass-produce human weapons." "How big?" "Big enough to arm resistance fighters on 100 worlds," she said. "Big enough to give free peoples a chance to fight back. Big enough to show the hegemony that they have finally met an enemy they cannot simply overwhelm." As they flew away from New Hanyang in ships that moved faster than anything Deho had ever seen, he watched his homeworld shrink behind them. The settlement was still burning, but already he could see rescue ships arriving to help the survivors. The quiet blacksmith who had lived in that simple workshop was gone forever. In his place was something the galaxy had never seen before, a human weaponsmith with the knowledge to forge tools of war that could challenge an empire built on conquest. The real fight was about to begin. The world called Draknari Prime was hidden behind 3 layers of cloaking technology and 2 artificial asteroid fields. When their ship finally broke through the last barrier, Deho pressed his face against the viewing window and gasped at what he saw. The planet was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. Cities of crystal and metal spiraled up from green valleys like flowers made of light. Bridges that seemed to be built from captured rainbows connected floating islands to mountain peaks. Everything glowed with soft colors that shifted and changed like living things. "My people were artists before we became warriors," Yuna said, standing beside him at the window. "We built beauty because we believed it made life worth living." "It still does," Deho replied. Their ship landed near what looked like a mountain, but as they got closer, Deho realized the entire peak was artificial. It had been carved and shaped into something between a factory and a temple. Smoke rose from hundreds of chimneys, but instead of being gray and dirty, it sparkled with colors that reminded him of his new forge fires. "Welcome to the greatest workshop in the galaxy," Yuna said, as they walked toward an entrance large enough for starships to pass through. Inside, Deho stopped walking and stared. The space was so vast he could not see the far walls. The ceiling disappeared into darkness high above his head. And everywhere, for as far as he could see, people were working with metal and fire and tools that belonged in dreams. Dozens of forge complexes filled the enormous space, each one bigger than his entire workshop back on New Hanyang. Human smiths worked alongside alien technicians, creating weapons that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. The sound was like a symphony of hammers and anvils, all working together in perfect rhythm. "How many people work here?" he asked. 3,000 smiths from 47 different species, Haye Jin replied, consulting a device that showed information in floating symbols. "But the humans are the most important. They are the ones who give the weapons their special properties." As they walked through the complex, Daeho saw projects that made his previous work look simple. A team of smiths was creating armor that existed in several dimensions at once. Another group was forging swords that could cut through time itself. In one corner, engineers were building weapons that could fire projectiles across space, without the projectiles ever existing in the space between. The Mark 7 disruption. Blades are testing at 97% effectiveness against hegemony shields, Kyungmin reported, reading from a screen covered in numbers and graphs. The quantum armor can stop direct hits from their heavy weapons. The siege engines are ready for field testing. They stopped at a platform that overlooked the main production floor. Below them, hundreds of workers moved in organized patterns, each team focused on a different type of weapon. The efficiency was beautiful to watch, like a dance performed by people who had practiced together for years. "How many weapons are we making?" Daeho asked. 43 forge complexes are now operational across the galaxy, Yuna replied. Each one produces approximately 50 weapons per day. We have armed resistance cells on 116 worlds. The numbers made Daeho's head spin. Thousands of weapons, hundreds of worlds, millions of people all working toward the same goal. It was so much larger than anything he had imagined when Yuna first walked into his simple workshop. "Are we winning?" he asked. "We are surviving," Kyungmin said carefully. "The Hegemony Advance Fleet reached the edge of human space yesterday. They will arrive at Earth in 18 days. 18 days. Daeho felt the weight of those words. "Are we ready?" "We are as ready as we can be," Yuna replied. "The question is whether it will be enough." That evening, Daeho found himself alone with Yuna on a balcony that overlooked the forge complex. The artificial suns of Draknari Prime were setting, painting the sky in colors that had no names in any human language. Below them, the great workshop continued its work, the fires never stopping, the hammers never resting. "Tell me about your people before the war," Daeho said. Yuna was quiet for a long moment, her scales shifting to colors that seemed sad. "We were builders and dreamers. We created art that could think and music that could heal. Our cities grew like gardens shaped by desire rather than necessity. What happened when the hegemony came? We tried to talk to them. We thought any species capable of traveling between stars would understand the value of different ways of thinking." Her voice grew bitter. "We were wrong. They harvested our worlds for raw materials and enslaved our children to serve in their armies. Within 50 years, a civilization of millions became a few thousand refugees hiding in space." Daeho reached out and took her hand. Her scales were warm against his palm, and he could feel the sadness that lived beneath her warrior exterior. "We will stop them." "Perhaps." She turned to face him, her golden eyes reflecting the forge fires below. "But even if we do, what kind of galaxy will we leave behind? One where the ability to kill determines who survives? Then we make sure the right people have that ability," Daeho said. "We make sure the weapons we are creating end up in the hands of people who remember what they are fighting to protect." Yuna smiled, and he realized that somewhere between that first night in his workshop and this moment, his feelings toward her had changed into something deeper than friendship or partnership. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that. She was someone who had lost everything and still found the strength to hope. "There is something I should tell you," she said softly. "When this war ends, if we survive, the Draknari Council has asked me to serve as ambassador to Earth. I would be helping to build relationships between our species." "That sounds like important work," Daeho replied. "It would mean staying near human space, near the people who helped us reclaim our freedom." She looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "Near you if you wanted." Daeho felt his heart speed up. "What are you asking?" "I am asking if you think there might be a future for us together. After the war, when we can think about building instead of destroying." He looked out over the forge complex, at the thousands of people working together to create weapons that could save the galaxy. 3 months ago, he had been a tired blacksmith with no hopes beyond fixing farming tools and making horseshoes. Now he was part of something that could change the fate of every free species in the galaxy. "I think," he said carefully, "that the best things I have ever created have been made with Yuna's scales shifted, through colors that spoke of joy and hope and possibilities that neither of them had dared to imagine before this moment. Below them, the Great Forge continued its work, preparing for a battle that would determine whether freedom could survive in a galaxy where strength too often triumphed over wisdom. The call to battle came at dawn on the 18th day. Daeho was in the weapon testing chamber, putting final adjustments on his greatest creation, when alarms began sounding throughout the forge complex. The sound was deep and mournful, like the dying song of some enormous creature. "They are here," Yuna said, appearing in the doorway with her armor already strapped on. "The hegemony main fleet has dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system." Daeho looked down at the weapon in his hands. He had been working on it for weeks, ever since they arrived at Draknari Prime. It was not a sword or a gun or anything that looked like a traditional weapon. Instead, it appeared to be a simple metal rod no longer than his forearm, covered in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "The World Breaker," he said quietly. "Is it ready?" Yuna asked. Daeho had forged the weapon from crystallized spacetime itself, using techniques that should not have been possible. The metal existed partially outside normal reality, and when activated, it would create a bubble of altered physics around its target. Inside that bubble, the laws that governed energy and matter would be different. Hegemony technology, designed to work with one set of physical rules, would simply stop functioning. "It is ready," he said, "but I can only make it work once. After that, every quantum matrix in the forge ship will burn out." "Once should be enough," Yuna replied. "If it works." They made their way to the command center of the forge ship Eternal Anvil, the mobile weapons factory that had become the heart of their resistance fleet. Through the viewing windows, Daeho could see the hegemony armada approaching like a storm made of metal and malice. The enemy ships were massive, each one larger than a city. Their hulls moved and flowed like living tissue, covered in weapons that could crack planets and shields that could turn aside the light of stars. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands, stretching across space in formations that spoke of perfect coordination and overwhelming power. "Our fleet?" Daeho asked. "Ships from 87 different species," Kyungmin reported from his position at the tactical displays. "Every resistance cell, every free world, every group that still fights against hegemony rule. 3,000 vessels in total." It sounded like a lot until Daeho compared it to what they were facing. The hegemony fleet outnumbered them 10 to 1, and each enemy ship was larger and more heavily armed than anything the resistance had managed to build. "We cannot win a straight fight," Yejin said, her fingers dancing over control panels that showed the positions of both fleets. "Our only chance is to disable their command structure before they can coordinate their attack." "The flagship," Yuna agreed, pointing to a ship at the center of the hegemony formation. It was larger than the others, its hull covered in growths that pulsed with bioluminescent light. "If we can take out their central coordination, the other ships will be fighting blind." "Range to target?" Daeho asked. 12,000 kilometers and closing," Kyungmin replied. "We will be in optimal firing range in 6 minutes." The battle began before they reached the flagship. Hegemony ships opened fire with weapons that turned space itself into a killing field. Beams of energy that could melt asteroids reached out toward the resistance fleet. Missiles that existed in folded dimensions appeared inside ships without warning. But the resistance had weapons too. Human-forged steel guided their projectiles through shields that should have stopped anything. Quantum disruptors created holes in reality that swallowed enemy fire. Armor plating that existed in multiple dimensions deflected attacks that should have destroyed them instantly. "Hull breach on Deck 7, Hyjin reported as the ship shook from a near miss. "Quantum shields holding at 60%. Through the viewing windows, Daeho watched ships on both sides burn and die. A resistance cruiser from the Centauri colonies simply disappeared when a hegemony weapon hit it directly. A moment later, one of the enemy destroyers cracked in half when a human-guided missile found a weak point in its armor. "Target acquired," Kyungmin announced. "Hegemony flagship is within optimal range." Daeho moved to the firing control station, the World Breaker heavy in his hands. The weapon had taken weeks to forge and might work only once. Everything they had built, everyone they had lost, every hope for freedom in the galaxy came down to this single moment. "Fire," he said quietly. The weapon discharged with no visible beam, no explosion, no dramatic display of power. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. The Hegemony flagship continued its approach, weapons still blazing, hull still glowing with alien energy. Then the changes began. The flagship's weapons went dark first, their energy simply ceasing to exist as the bubble of altered physics reached them. The ship's hull stopped flowing and became rigid, its biomechanical systems unable to function in space where the laws of biology no longer applied. The glowing patterns on its surface faded to dull gray. The effect spread outward from the flagship like ripples on a pond. Other Hegemony ships began to go dark as the quantum cascade reached them. Their weapons fell silent. Their shields collapsed. Their engines stopped pushing them forward. "It is working," Kyung-min said, wonder clear in his voice. "The entire fleet is going dark." Within minutes, the space around them was filled with drifting Hegemony ships, all of them powerless and dead. The overwhelming armada that had seemed invincible was now nothing more than expensive scrap metal floating in the void. "Enemy fleet is completely disabled," Heejin reported. "No active weapons, no shields, no propulsion. They are helpless, but victory had come with a price. The World Breaker had burned out every quantum system on the Eternal Anvil. The great Ford ship that had been the center of their resistance was now crippled, its advanced systems failing one by one. "Evacuation procedures in effect," Kyung-min announced over the ship's communication system. "All personnel to the escape pods. We have perhaps 10 minutes before complete system failure." Daeho remained at his station, watching the disabled Hegemony fleet drift helplessly through space. They had won, but the cost was everything they had built. "The Ford ship is finished," Yuna said, appearing beside him. "But the work will continue. We have armed resistance cells across the galaxy. We have shown that the Hegemony can be defeated." "What happens now?" Daeho asked. "Now we rebuild," she replied. "But this time, we rebuild in a galaxy where freedom has a chance." As they made their way to the escape pods, Daeho took one last look at the forge that had become his life. The World Breaker lay on the control panel, its metal now dark and lifeless. It had served its purpose. The tired blacksmith was gone forever. In his place was the man who had forged victory from the fires of determination and hope. 5 years had passed since the Battle of Broken Stars, as the historians now called it. Daeho stood in his new workshop on a world whose name still felt strange on his tongue. The building was smaller than the Great Forge complex on Draknari Prime, but it felt more like home. Through the windows he could see a city being rebuilt with principles that valued beauty as much as strength. The war was over, but the work had never stopped. Every day brought new visitors to his workshop, scientists who wanted to understand how human metallurgy could break the laws of physics. Artists who hoped to learn techniques that could create beauty from impossible materials. Young smiths from dozens of species who came to study under the man who had forged victory from fire and determination. "The morning appointments are here," Yuna said, entering the workshop with a data pad covered in requests and schedules. "The Centauri delegation wants to discuss building structures that exist in folded space. The Tau Ceti engineers are interested in your self-repairing metal techniques." "Still think they are asking for the impossible," Daeho replied, then caught himself smiling. "Actually, let me think about that." Over the past 5 years, he had learned that very little was truly impossible when human creativity met alien science. They had built bridges that connected distant worlds through dimensional gates. They had created tools that could heal damaged reality itself. They had made art that existed in 17 different states of physics at the same time. The workshop around him showed the fruits of this collaboration. Weapons had given way to wonder. Where once he had forged swords to cut through energy shields, now he created sculptures that sang with the voices of stars. Where once he had made armor to turn aside particle beams, now he crafted jewelry that could store memories and emotions. "There is something else," Yuna said, setting down her data pad and moving closer to his workbench. "The Draknari Council has offered me a permanent position as ambassador to the Interspecies Consortium. It would be based on Earth, near the memorial to the Resistance." Daeho looked up from the piece he was working on, a wind chime made from crystallized time that would play different melodies depending on which dimension the wind was blowing from. "That sounds like important work." "It is," Yuna agreed. "But it would also mean being close to wherever you decide to set up your next workshop. If you were interested in continuing our partnership." Over the 5 years since the battle, their relationship had grown from professional collaboration into something deeper and more personal. She was still the dragon girl who had walked into his forge that first night, but now he knew the woman beneath the scales. He knew how she laughed when he accidentally created something that defied 3 laws of physics at once. He knew how she looked when she thought no one was watching, her ancient eyes soft with contentment. "Are you asking me to move to Earth?" he said carefully. "I am asking if you want to build something together that is not a weapon," she replied. "Art, architecture, maybe even a future that belongs to both of us." Daeho had been thinking about this conversation for months. They worked well together, better than he had ever worked with anyone. She understood his techniques even when he did not understand them himself. She could see possibilities in his creations that he never imagined. More than that, she made him want to create things that would outlast wars and conflicts and the memory of old pain. "There is a valley on Earth," he said slowly, "in the region that used to be called Korea. The government is offering land grants to anyone willing to help rebuild the manufacturing centers. I have been thinking about it. A new forge? A new everything," he said. "Workshop, school, research center. Maybe even a place where young smiths from different species can learn to work together." He met her golden eyes. "If you think that kind of collaboration would be worthwhile." Yuna's scales shifted through colors that spoke of joy and anticipation and hope for the future. "I think I would like that very much." "There is one condition," Daeho added with a smile. "No more weapons. No more tools of war. From now on, we only create things that make life better." "Agreed," she said immediately, "though I reserve the right to argue about what counts as making life better." Through the workshop windows, they could see construction crews working on buildings that would house species that had never known each other existed 10 years ago. The hegemony defeat had opened space for new alliances, new friendships, new ways of thinking about the galaxy and their place in it. The resistance networks that had fought the hegemony had become trade routes and cultural exchange programs. The forge complexes that had produced weapons now created art and architecture and tools for peaceful purposes. The ships that had carried fighters to battle now carried students and scholars and tourists, eager to experience the diversity the galaxy had to offer. "What will we call it?" Yuna asked. "The new workshop. The Eternal Forge," Daeho said without hesitation. "A place where we create things that will outlast both of us." As they began making plans for their new life together, Daeho reflected on how much had changed since that first night when Yuna walked into his simple workshop. The tired blacksmith who had accepted a life of quiet mediocrity was gone forever. In his place was someone who had learned that the most important creations were not weapons or tools, but relationships and hope and the belief that tomorrow could be better than today. The dragon girl who had brought him news of war and destruction had become the woman who would help him build a future worth having. Together, they had forged victory from the fires of determination. Now they would forge something even more precious, a life built on love and creativity, and the endless possibility of what two people could accomplish when they worked together toward a common dream. Outside, the artificial sunset painted the sky in colors that reminded him of forge fire, but these fires would burn with creation rather than destruction, with art rather than war, with hope rather than fear. The tired blacksmith was truly gone now. The master craftsman who remained would spend the rest of his days creating wonders that would help heal a galaxy that had seen too much conflict and too little beauty. And he would not be working alone.